Shalom Alechem, Assalamu Alaikum, Irini Mazisu, Pax Vobiscum, peace be unto you. In this video, 1 Samuel, chapter 8, verse 22, there's 22 verses I should say. In verse 4 it says here, the men of Israel gathered themselves together. In the Masoretic it says the elders, so we can see that it's not only the elders, it's actually all of the men of Israel. Not only the elders, so it's a larger group. Verse 5 says, set over us a king to judge us, versus make us a king. So it's just a difference of semantics. They're doing the same thing. But set over us, so you can see the dynamic is the king is over them, the hierarchy in place. Verse 6, evil. The thing was evil in the eyes of Samuel. In the Masoretic, it's displeasing. No, it's not just displeasing. It was evil. It was very, very bad in his eyes. In verse 8, there's an omission of done to me. So we can see that Elohim is taking it personally. It's not that they just done the things they've done since the day he brought them up. These are the things they have done to him. They've done to him. You could even extend it to say they've done against me. But it just says here, they've done to me. In verse 9, testify. You shall solemnly testify to them, versus to protest, which means to admonish. Can also mean testify or witness, so we can see it. There are similar terms, just in case one's wondering, are they very different? They're not. Verse 12, make captains, he's going to make your sons captains to himself, captains of hundreds and thousands, versus thousands and fifties. So yeah, they're responsible for a larger group of men, not just 50s, but actually hundreds. So like centurions would be the equivalent. Significant difference in this verse as well. Verse 12, it says, gather his vintage, which means to get the yield of the wine gathering in the grapes, versus to ear his ground, which means to plow his plowing, or to plow in the season. So it's specific to grapes, specific to wine. Verse 14, the good olive yards versus the best of all, the fields, the vineyards, the olive yards. So it seems to be pointing specifically to olive yards only, in terms of it being the good olive yards. Whereas in the Masoretic, it seems the king is a little more greedy. He wants the best of everything. He doesn't just want the good olive yards. Verse 15, we see the eunuchs. He's going to give the vineyards to his eunuchs, versus the officers. Could be very similar positions. Verse 16, significant difference of good herds versus goodliest young men, which is redundant because they were already mentioned as men servants. That could include the young men. So why are they repeating that when good herds are not included in in what they're taking? There's another significant difference because he's taking the 10th of them, which is the servants, the handmaids, the herds, and the donkeys. He's taking the 10th of them for those works. So 1/10 are being taken to be put to work. In the Masoretic, they are, all of them, 100% of them are being put to work. So why is he setting aside 90% to not work? I'm not exactly sure, but that's what it says here. Verse 17, flocks versus sheep. Verse 18, to yourselves, you have chosen to yourselves. This is the king they've chosen to themselves, versus the king you have chosen, and then it says you, which is grammatically incorrect. Big difference as well in this verse. It says there's an omission of because you have chosen to yourselves a king. So the consequence of them choosing a king is that the Lord, Adonai, will not listen to you in those days. We're not given a reason why. in the Masoretic, in the Septuagint, we are given the rationale. It is because they have chosen to themselves a king. So it is their choice to choose a king, and they will reap the consequences of their decision, since they were warned beforehand of all the consequences far in advance of this decision to choose a king. And in spite of their warnings, they go ahead with this decision, so that is why he will not hear them. So that is the specific rationale. So they heard the words concerning the king, I should say, verse 19. So they would not listen to Samuel, versus they would refuse to obey the voice of Samuel. So these are the words of Samuel concerning the king, versus the possibly instructions or commands that Samuel told them and they refused to obey. So that is the implication with obeying. It could be read that way. In verse 20, we see, and we will also be, there's 4 ands here, and we will also be like the nations, and our king will judge us, and he will go out before us, and he'll fight our battles. In the Masoretic it says, connecting to the previous verse, we will have a king over us, that we may also be like the nations, and that our king may judge us. And then there's 2 ands. So what's the difference here? I think in terms of tone, in the Septuagint, they're stubbornly set in their way, in their decision of choosing a king, and it sounds more shameless. They're just rubbing it in the face of Adonai, saying, we're going to choose a king, and he will do this, and he'll do this, and he'll do this for us. On the other hand, the Masoretic, it sounds like they're explaining why they want a king, so they're reasoning to God, or to Samuel at least, to God via Samuel. We will have a king over us. Why? Because we want to be like the nations, and also that this king will judge us, and he'll do this and he'll do that. So at the same time, it is less, it's still shameless, but less shameless. They're rubbing it in his face just a little less, but you can see it's more rationalizing. Whereas in the Septuagint, it's just full on, stubborn, and they're just shameless about it. In verse 21, Samuel spoke the words of the people in the ears of Adonai, or the ears of Yah. Verses, he rehearsed the words, so pretty much the same. So, but my question is, why did Samuel have to do this? Why does he have to rehearse or speak the words of the people into the ears of Adonai? Doesn't he know all this already beforehand? Doesn't he hear as well? Well, my answer to this is just my opinion, but perhaps it is similar to our prayers and communication to God. God knows the things we need before we even ask, but he still wants us to pray to him and ask him these things to show our dependence on him, to show that we fully trust in him. In this case, in verse 21, God wants Samuel perhaps to emotionally vent or process the situation, because he seems to be an emotional individual. Perhaps it is also because, like we see at the start of 1 Samuel, 1 Kingdoms, we see that Adonai is speaking to Samuel as a young child, calling his name Samuel, Samuel, and then Samuel's instructed by Eli to respond, your servant hears. Speak, your servant hears. Speak, Lord. And now in stark contrast to that, in chapter 8 now, we see Samuel is an old man now, and he's speaking to Adonai. And instead of Samuel saying, speak, Adonai, your servant hears, it's now Adonai listening to a servant. So perhaps it's a nice poetic contrast there. In verse 22, it says, appoint them a king versus to make a king. So just semantics. And then lastly, it says here, Samuel said to the men of Israel, let each man depart to his city, versus go every man to his city. So the tone seems to be get out of here, get out of here. Maybe he's displeased, and he's voicing it through the language he's using, so depart. or just go back. But that's just my artistic interpretation of that. So I want to touch again on this topic. This isn't part of the content, but I just want to explore this a little bit more. Yeah, why does God want us to pray to Him things He already knows? Again, I just want to reemphasize, He wants us to show our dependence on Him, to recognize He is our provider, and He is the one we put all our trust in. We trust Him first before anyone else. Okay, so we've answered that part, but why does He want us to say things that He already knows? For example, when He asked Adam and Eve, what happened when, in terms of the situation, the circumstance with the eating of the forbidden fruit, and in this case with Samuel, recounting the words of the people. Well, I believe, in my opinion, the answer is found in Jeremiah 17, verses 9 and 10. The heart is deep beyond all things, it is the man who can know Him. And then the following verse, I, Adonai, try the hearts and prove the reins, to give to everyone according to his ways, according to the fruit of his devices. So until the day of our death, we're always being tested. We're being proved by our Creator. We all go through a process of being refined into His image, according to His will. And secondly, He wants to reward us, to bless us accordingly, or to chastise us in order to lead us back to the right path so that He can eventually bless us. So that's all for 1 Samuel chapter 8, 1 Kingdoms 8. Till next time, we'll look at 1 Samuel chapter 9. And I thank you very much for your time. I bid you all shalom aleichem, assalamu alaikum, irini mazisu, pax vobiscum, peace be unto you, and maranatha.